Antibiotics play a major role in modern farming, often helping animals grow larger and healthier, giving us more meat that is safer to eat. But they are actually having some insanely dangerous effects on the animals. From the spread of E. coli to them going completely unchecked in our food, the use of antibiotics in farming is endangering humans, and here's how. At first glance, the use of antibiotics doesn't sound like a bad thing. After all, they've been a part of our daily lives for decades, and that's exactly the problem. I mean, just look at the growth promoter called colistin. This antimicrobial is one part of this ever-growing issue. It was once used as a growth promoter on pig and chicken farms in China. But while it was able to help the animals get bigger, the increased growth actually fostered the development of E. coli in the animals' bodies. And trust me, you really don't want to mess around with E. coli. It can cause some extreme gut problems, which can be pretty life-threatening for children and the elderly. And it can spread pretty quickly if it gets into the water. Now, China and many other countries have already banned the use of colistin, but that's clearly not enough, and that is exactly why scientists have been busy issuing warnings against the use of antibiotics overall in food. I mean, we're already at a stage where many new bacteria that are emerging are becoming resistant to our immune systems. Add E. coli to that, and you've got yourself a disaster that's just waiting to happen. Now, E. coli itself is already a threat to human health, but when new strains of it come crashing down at your immune system, it's gonna be a lot of trouble. So much so that it's being said that this could become an even worse problem than antibiotic resistance. Think about that. And look, the last thing we need is another outbreak of disease. Although, there's some good news in this as well. The discovery made by scientists in regard to colistin, as well as the E. coli strains, would have far-reaching implications, most of which are negative, but it'll also allow the development of antimicrobial peptides. Those that belong to the same class as colistin, at least. Not sure what that means? Let me explain. Antimicrobial peptides are natural compounds that all living things produce. It's all part of their immune system. The purpose of them is to provide defense against infection. Colistin, while it might be troublesome, is derived from a bacterial AMP that is used by microbes to protect themselves from other organisms. Interestingly, it has a chemical structure similar to some AMPs that are produced in the human immune system. You get now how it could also be helpful, right? That being said, none of that takes away from the dangers of using them in the first place. In fact, the need for such development has actually come from the threat that is antibiotics. But it's a tough battle to fight. Why? Because the use of antibiotics in farming has been a contentious issue. First, because it's effective in the short term, but as I've said, can cause some big problems down the line due to its potential contribution to the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Antibiotics are often given to livestock to prevent and treat infections and to promote growth. However, the overuse and misuse of antibiotics in agriculture have led to the emergence of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, one that can spread to humans through the food chain or the environment. It develops when bacteria are exposed to antibiotics, and some of them survive and reproduce, passing on their resistance to their offspring. The more antibiotics are used, the greater the chance that bacteria will develop resistance, making it harder to treat infections in both humans and animals. I mean, you might have heard the term superbug or superbacteria, and this is exactly why it's called that. Because while it already exists, the more antibiotics are used on it, the more the stronger one gets to reproduce and pass on its resistance. Oh, and fun fact, ever heard of those 99.9% germ-killing soaps and detergents? Well, the rest of the 0.01% also follows the same practice. But of course, that's a discussion for another day. For now, let's focus on the fact that antibiotic-resistant infections in humans can be acquired from eating contaminated food, as well as exposure to contaminated water or contact with animals carrying resistant bacteria. These infections can be severe and difficult to treat, leading to prolonged illness, hospitalization, or even death. So, in light of that, it's a little reassuring that many countries have come forward to take steps to reduce and, in many cases, completely ban antibiotics. However, it's a long road that needs to be traveled very quickly, because if the damage is once done, it'll be very difficult to reverse. So then, the question is, what can we do? Well, realistically speaking, I don't think we can do much on a personal level, except try and cut back on meat from animals that have been given these growth supplements. Generally, humans are only prescribed antibiotics by a doctor to treat an infection, so don't go taking any yourself without talking to a doctor first. But there's a lot we can still do, it's just a bit harder to do. This one's actually for the farmers, the legislators, and anyone who can spread the word. We need to start with preventative measures. Farmers can implement measures to prevent diseases in livestock, such as maintaining clean and hygienic living conditions, providing a balanced diet, and ensuring adequate ventilation. These practices can help to reduce the risk of infections and minimize the need for antibiotics, so that they are only used when they are really necessary. On top of that, we can look into probiotics and prebiotics. Probiotics are live microorganisms that can help to improve gut health and boost the immune system of livestock. Prebiotics, on the other hand, are non-digestible substances that promote the growth of beneficial gut bacteria. Their combined use will definitely help reduce the need for antibiotics in animals in the first place. Now, this one may make some people feel unsure, but how about herbal remedies? Now, I know that's absurd, right? Well, maybe not. In fact, some farmers use herbal remedies such as garlic, oregano, and turmeric to prevent and treat infections in livestock. They don't compete directly with antibiotics, but they prevent a situation where they're needed. So, a win-win. And there's no doubt that these natural remedies have antimicrobial properties and can help to boost the immune system. However, more research is needed to determine their effectiveness and safety. So yes, if you don't buy into this, I can understand. And while we're on the subject of preventative measures, how about we make sure vaccinations are in place? You can't deny that those are effective in preventing infections in livestock. By vaccinating animals, farmers can reduce the risk of disease and minimize the need for antibiotics. Gladly, we've got vaccines for a range of diseases that affect livestock. And if even that's not enough, there's already a practice in place called selective breeding. This way, you can only produce livestock that's got better resistance to disease, similar to the bacteria that resist antibiotics. Checkmate. The point is, we have a problem, but it's not as easy to get rid of it as we may think. So we manage it, because sure, it's harmful, but it's also necessary in many areas. Let me give you an example. Antibiotics are used to protect not just animals and us from harmful bacteria, but also plants. It's almost a necessity for the growth of fruits like pears, apples, and peaches. Streptomycin is one of these and is used in many countries. They're sprayed on flowers and leaves in the spring to stop bacteria from growing and spreading. But after the plants are infected, antibiotics don't work. They're only used when there's a high risk of disease, so most orchards aren't treated every year. And in the US, only a small amount of antibiotics are used on plants compared to animals. But the good part is that these only stay active on plants for a short time, and they don't leave harmful residues on the fruit that we eat. They've been used for over 50 years in the US to protect crops without hurting people or the environment, and no concerning issues have been seen yet. So there you have it. This was how the use of antibiotics in farming is endangering humans.